Rock on. So this class is obviously on deployment. Who was it I was talking to earlier? He was like, "Why do we?" Oh, Casey, it was you, right? And it was like, no, it was. And he said terrible things. No, it was just like the instructions for deployment don't look that bad. So like, why are we doing it as a class? Like, is this thing really going to take 2.5 hours? It's probably not going to take 2.5 hours. The reason we're budgeting that in there is because deployment is like everything else in programming, where if you make one typo, it completely like ruins everything else. And also, one thing that I'm not sure we framed very well at the start of this class that I've seen a lot of you guys struggling with is that if you get a typo, it doesn't mean that you did anything wrong. I mean, it seems like a lot of people seem to, like, if they get an error because of a typo, it's like, ah, shit, everything I thought I knew, I don't know, like, I don't know anything, this is all terrible. Yeah, right. You know what I'm talking about. And that is totally not the case. If you made a typo and something doesn't work, it's because you made a typo. It's not because there was a fundamental flaw in your understanding of programming. It's because you put a semicolon in the wrong place, and that's it. So, or something else. So yeah, or you forgot to do like you did users.rb when it should have been user.rb. Just some little letter. So don't crap on yourself. Like, it's totally okay. Doesn't mean that there's like a problem in the way you understand programming. And also, thank you for you guys for the feedback that you gave us. We just got to look at it late last night. It finally got out to us, and we really, really appreciate that. Yeah, so deployment. Okay, so the first thing we're going to talk about is Rails environments. So you may have noticed that when you first create a Rails app, it actually creates 3 databases for you. When you do rate db create, it creates 3 databases. It creates so you probably ended up with tuner development, tuner test, and tuner production. Creates 3 databases for you. So obviously one of those is for development, one's for testing, and one's for production. Why bother having 3 different databases? Any thoughts? Lyra?
Trying things out when you go to production, you just deploy to Heroku.
Yep. Yeah, exactly. And so, like, if I'm making some sort of a change, if I'm just like testing stuff out, I probably don't want to be testing it out with production data. That could be bad. I just want to test it out with test data. And the reason test and development are their own separate things is because test data, usually you want to delete it as soon as you've created it. Test data is just sort of to make sure everything is working appropriately. And it's development where you're actually going in and you're really clicking things on and testing things out. Everything in test is usually automated. So these are the 3 different environments that Rails has by default. You can create more, but these are the default ones. I'm not going to go into these a whole lot, except to say that everything we've done so far has been in development, the development environment, with the exception of any RSpec stuff we did. That automatically goes into the test environment, so it goes to a completely different database with like different configuration and everything. When you deploy, we're going into the production environment. So again, it's a completely different database, a completely different set of configurations. If you're interested in like at a granular level what the different configurations are, you can take a look at this file. But I just sort of wanted to touch on the fact that there are these different environments and they all use different databases. That's really all I'm going to say about that for right now. Any questions about this? The whole environment thing? Aaron?
For tests, if we just play around and test it and then delete it, what's the difference between using that and just want to use Rails to see the errors when you actually try something out?
So the advantage of testing is that you don't need to like click around on things. So I mean, RSpec, it does everything for you automatically. For instance, our tests with Garnet, we have a lot of tests for Garnet. That's because Garnet's really complicated and there are lots of different things. We want to make sure, for instance, that you guys can't see all the mean notes we write about you behind your back that we can only see on our end. I'm just kidding. But we want to make sure that, like, you can't see someone else's grades or their attendance or whatever. And we could just go through the app and, like, just click on every link and like sign out as an instructor and sign in as a student, and click on every link again, and like sign out and click on every link as someone who's not signed in at all, you can see that there's a lot of like clicking and moving around that would need to be done. With tests, it just does all of that for you. I type RSpec, hit enter, and then it tests all of those things for me if I wrote the tests. And so that's the advantage of that. So you could do it that way. It's just going to take a really long time. Any other questions about that? Cool. All right. So let's talk about what deployment actually is. So deployment means taking your app and putting it on a server somewhere. So it's not on localhost anymore. No one else can see your localhost. Now you're putting it on HTTP something, so anyone can see your app. Yeah, that's pretty much it. So we are going to be using a service called Heroku. I don't know why it's called Heroku. It's like some reference to like a poem or something. I don't know. But Heroku is basically this really easy to use service where it's free and you don't need to like give them your credit card information or anything. And to put something on Heroku, you type get push Heroku master as opposed to get push origin master. And it sort of takes care of everything else for you if you don't have any errors in your code. If you have any errors in your code, then things get more complicated. So that's what we're going to be doing today. But just to talk a little bit about Heroku, one thing you're going to notice when we look at a Heroku app is that it takes about 30 seconds for it to load the first time. After that, if you hit refresh, then it loads much more quickly. But the first time you go to that page, it takes about 30 seconds for it to load, which seems agonizingly slow. The reason for that is when you create a Heroku app, it's going to do bundle install and create a database for you and everything. But if a certain amount of time goes by without anyone using that app, it deletes everything in your app. It deletes all of your files. It removes all of those gems. It saves all of your data in the database, but it deletes everything else to save memory. That way, the only things that are taking up memory on Heroku are the apps that are actively being used. If an app's not being used, it just gets rid of all that stuff, turns off that server, and that way Heroku can free up all of its resources. So the first time you load a page, it's going to take a while to load. After that, it goes much faster until I think like maybe 2 hours of inactivity, and then it goes to sleep again. Casey?
Does it matter what point we actually get Heroku in our application? Like, should it always be at the beginning, middle, or the end?
Great question. So, because there are lots of little things that can munge up your deployment, I would say deploy as quickly as you possibly can. That's also going to be the goal for this class today. Ideally, by now, you guys all have done at least Rails new, and your app name -d PostgreSQL. You have done that by now. And so we're going to try deploying that up to Heroku. And then we'll see if there are any errors and any bugs or anything. If you haven't done that, or if you want to try another one, then we've got our own tuner one that we can push out. But I would say do it much earlier rather than later because there are always little bugs that you didn't anticipate. And one thing that we really don't want to happen, which has happened a lot in the past, is like Thursday at 11 o'clock rolls around and everyone's like, oh, well, guess I better deploy my app now. And then everything sort of goes up in smoke. So I would say, yeah, deploy as early as you possibly can. And then like every 1 or 2 commits, push up your new changes to Heroku. And just try to keep Heroku as current as possible so you don't need to, you're not caught short at the end with a whole bunch of deployment bugs. Sarah?
So, what if you, I guess, push up new changes or the new changes have errors? Will it mess up?
If the new changes have errors, then you're going to get some sort of a deployment error. And I think it will leave the old version of your app running, and it'll just say, oh, we can't put in these new changes because they have errors in them. Not entirely sure, though, and it usually doesn't work out that prettily.
Does it tell you?
About as well as Rails tells you what the errors are. So depending on who you are, that could be really good or not great. But that's another thing we're going to, we have some errors explicitly built into the lesson plan today that we're going to troubleshoot for. Other questions?
So always do a git commit to GitHub first before doing deployments. So always.
Yep. Yeah, you push to Heroku the exact same way you push to GitHub, and so, well, except you use Heroku instead of Origin. And so you need to make sure you add and commit first. All right, so the next thing on here is you guys going and getting set up with Heroku accounts and like looking through this guide. Before I release you to do that, any questions? I'm already asked if there are any questions, but I'm asking again. Byron.
Just like a question, I was kind of doing Heroku, but if you Heroku create, it gives you the link to it, but does it have a link on the site, like afterwards, like on Heroku, like in your settings?
Yes.
URL?
Yeah, but we're not quite to that point yet. Adrian?
You've been, just saying a lot about the issues that it can have with errors. Say you have like an error that you know about, that like I have a particular route that I know is not working. Is it going to, but the beginning part of my app still works. Is it going to like be impossible, or do you have to like?
So that would be okay. Things that can throw an error are like if you have a gem installed incorrectly, or there's some sort of error in your migrations file, or if you have one error in your CSS that keeps your CSS from being valid, that will break your app and keep it from deploying. But, so it's weird. A CSS error can keep your app from deploying. A broken root, that's probably okay, which I know doesn't make any sense. This is why testing is so important. But why don't we go ahead and get you guys started on this. So it says take 10 minutes to pair up with a partner. I would like it if you did and like kept a conversation with the person next to you about what you're doing in here. So this is the getting started guide. And the first thing it's going to ask you to do is, let's see, let me double check in here. Nope, okay, Heroku tool belt isn't there. So yeah, just look through this. Please also create a Heroku account while you're doing this. So create a Heroku account and look at all this stuff. And just skim it, don't need to read it too thoroughly. I would say all the important stuff, the most important stuff is like up through this visit your application part. The things after that are less important. But just skim it and see if you find anything interesting. And then I'll check back in 10 minutes. So at, let's say 25.